Again, just like with demand, we're going to have some things that cause a shift of our entire supply curve. But we're going to have an acronym, so don't worry. It's going to be easy to remember. So what we want to understand first is what determinants cause an increase in supply. Or what that is saying is that what would cause our supply curve to shift to the right? What events could occur in our economy that means the price of whatever product will not change. However, the amount that producers are willing to supply at any price has now increased. We're going to start with the letter S, and the S stands for the number of sellers. This is pretty easy. Like if a new donut shop opens up in town, well, clearly there's going to be more donuts supplied and made available within our town. No matter what the price of those donuts are, there's going to be more donuts available. Easy enough, right? P stands for increase in technology and productivity. So this is one I think a lot of us are probably pretty familiar with. It's just that the amount of a product that's made available is going to change as technology and productivity both change. Easy example, back to the donuts. Like if we go from making donuts by hand to getting a machine that makes donuts for us, hey, guess what? We're going to be able to supply more donuts. The price of donuts does not have to change. It's just that now we have new technology. We're more productive and it allows us to produce more. We're going to have I, and I stands for the cost of inputs. Salsa. I love salsa. One of the key inputs for salsa is tomatoes, right? You need tomatoes in order to make salsa. Tomatoes is then considered an input in production. So salsa is not tomatoes, but tomatoes are used in order to make salsa, right? If that makes sense. So what we're saying here is that if tomatoes go down in price, it'll allow us to produce more salsa. Our supply of salsa will increase. Now, why is that? Well, think of it this way. Say I have a little salsa company and I'm going to spend $100 on tomatoes no matter what. And with that $100 worth of tomatoes, I'm going to make salsa. But if the price of tomatoes goes down, I can now buy more tomatoes with that same amount of money. That same $100 is going to buy me a lot more tomatoes, which can make us more salsa. So I don't have to charge any more for my salsa because I didn't spend any more money to make it. I just now can make more salsa because the cost of tomatoes has decreased. So that's not the price of salsa changing. That's the price of one of its inputs changing. T is going to stand for taxes, a decrease in the amount of business taxes. And this is just the idea that as taxes decrease for businesses, they have less money that they have to pay to the government and more money that they're able to put into their business. And since less money is going to the government and more money is going into their business, that's going to increase the supply. We'll talk about this later. Maybe you remember from U.S. history, but that was kind of one of the key tenets of Reaganomics in the 1980s, of decreasing in business taxes and then deregulating the businesses. They could produce more, supply more, and it would, spur on our economy. We have E, and this stands for expectations. Now, this is like we saw expectations with demand, but this one's a little bit different because you have to think about you're not the demander in this case, you're the supplier. So if sellers expect the price to decrease in the future, they're going to increase their supply right now. And we're like, okay, hold on. Why is that? Well, if I'm making a product, right? If I'm making some product and I understand and I know that in the future, the market price of that product is going to fall. Like I'm not going to be able to sell it for as much later on. I want to try to sell as much as I can right now while it's still more expensive. So I'm going to be making more. I'm going to supply more now while that price is still high, so that I can make more money now before it gets cheaper in the future. And the last S stands for supply shocks. And supply shock is just anything that happens outside of our economy. It's just something that happens kind of out of the blue, and it has an impact on our ability to produce or what we produce and how we produce. So a great example is like with agriculture. If we have really good weather, like that's a supply shock, and that's going to increase our supply of crops that we're able to produce, right? In a weird way, World War II was a positive supply shock for the United States. We had a lot of resources sitting idle that we were not using. We talked the Great Depression, and World War II occurred, and it pulled us out of the Great Depression because we had so much that we had to supply and so much we had to produce, and our overall supply or our overall production of things that we were making during that time greatly increased. So if you notice, our word here is spites, S-P-I-T-E-S. And it'll end up going the same way as we talk about decreasing in supply. Whenever we have a shift to the left of our supply curve, we're going to use these same letters, but we're just going to switch these things around a little bit. So again, the S stands for the number of sellers. A decrease in the number of sellers means there's going to be a decrease in the supply or a decrease in the amount of a product. Back to the donut example. Instead of a new donut shop, what if a donut shop closes down? Well, guess what? There's going to be fewer donuts available. If we have a car dealership that closes down, there are now fewer cars available. No matter what the price is, there's fewer of them available. That's the decrease in supply. The price of those things have not changed, but there are now fewer of them because there's a decrease in the number of sellers. P again stands for decrease in technology or productivity. We don't really ever see a decrease in technology, but decrease in productivity. Like, think about it. Thankfully, y'all are not second semester seniors, but you know that feeling when you're just looking forward to the next thing or whatever, and as you become less productive, the supply of schoolwork you're able to produce decreases, right? Like, I know I've been there before too. And so it's that idea that as our productivity decreases, the amount of stuff we're able to produce decreases. I is for an increase in the cost of inputs. Again, back to the salsa example. If tomatoes get more expensive, my $100 will not be able to buy me as many tomatoes as they were before, so I can't make as much salsa as I did once before. T stands for an increase in the amount of business taxes. So as businesses have to pay more taxes, that's more money they have to send to the government and less money that they get to invest into the company, and that means they won't be able to make as much because they don't have as much of their money going toward buying those resources in order to make stuff. E is expectations again. Sellers expect the price to increase in the future. If I know down the road this item is going to get super popular, it's going to sell for a lot more expensive, I'm going to hold off on my production right now because I want to produce as much as possible in the future. So the price has not yet changed. I expect the price in the future to go up, and therefore I don't want to sell it now while it's cheaper. I'd rather sell it later on when it's more expensive and I can make more money. And finally, the last S again is supply shocks. A good example of this is like a natural disaster, right? Or poor weather, or like I know especially like down like in Florida, whenever they grow oranges for orange juice, whenever there's like a frost, it can kill basically some of the oranges, and it decreases the amount of oranges and therefore orange juice that they're able to produce. So it could be like bad weather is a supply shock. Sometimes war is a negative supply shock as well. We saw this across parts of Europe after World War II, right? That war was a negative supply shock. It ruined a lot of their industry and they couldn't produce as much. That was a shock that kind of came from the outside. So here we have those 6 letters, those changes in supply. We have SPITES, the number of sellers, productivity and technology, input costs, taxes, expectations, and supply shocks.